The Motivation Mindset Workbook is designed to help teens and tweens discover what they love to do. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and welcome to the Kids Bookshelf. Ahead, we'll explore the book and talk with the author about the inspiration behind it. Ellen Braaten, Ph.D., is the founding director of the Learning and Emotional Assessment Program at Massachusetts General Hospital and associate professor of psychology at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Braaten is widely recognized as an expert in the field, particularly in the areas of assessing learning disabilities and attentional disorders. She joins us to talk about what you'll find in the Motivation Mindset Workbook. Dr. Braaten, welcome to the Kids Bookshelf.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, tell us about your work with children and how that work led to your wanting to create this book.
So my work goes back to my dissertation in graduate school, which was on ADHD. So I've been very interested in that group of children who have trouble with attention and hyperactivity and impulsivity. And that led me to look at something called processing speed for those kids who have trouble sort of keeping up in today's world. A lot of them have ADHD, not all of them do. And from there, I watched that group of kids with ADHD and like I said, my other area of research, which is slow processing speed, move on into young adulthood. And what I was finding is a lot of them really lacked motivation, and that we weren't really looking at motivation as part of the picture in terms of treating these kids. And then as I started to look at this, the pandemic happened. And motivation was hard for all of us. I would still say 5 years, almost 6 years, or 6 years now later, it's still pretty hard for a lot of us. So motivation is just one of those things that's the reason we do the things we do. And we have to have that kind of purpose in our life to stay motivated. And it's a lifelong pursuit.
Well, before we talk about some of the specific information you provide in the book, which we won't have time to cover it all, obviously, give us a brief overview. What are readers going to find here?
So in this book, it's a workbook that goes along with a book that I wrote a couple of years ago called Bright Kids Who Couldn't Care Less. And so that really delves into the science of motivation, the theories of motivation. And it's a book to read. It's written for parents, but parents really said, well, what do I do now? And while the book is filled with ideas, this is a workbook. So it's something that they can open up, and they can open up to almost any activity and figure out a way of engaging their child in thinking about one aspect of motivation or the things that get in the way of motivation. So there are activities really that are meant to be done alone, together, in a family, in a classroom. And so it's a much more engaging kind of book than a book that you sit down and read, although there's a lot of information in there as well.
So let's start with something basic. What do you mean, and what is motivation?
Very good question. So it's the why we do the things we do. It includes it's not something that's necessarily built into us. It's complicated, and it really includes a few different areas. We've got to look at getting started. So motivation is about initiating tasks. It's about keeping the fire burning. Once we find something we like, we've got to learn how to stick with it. And then it's fanning the flames. So it's being able to have space and air to breathe. So motivation includes all of that. We've got to have that spark. We've got to have sort of the fuel to keep motivation burning. And we've got to have the space to be able to enjoy it. So all of those things are important to motivation. And when you think about how we raise our children these days, it's kind of tough. They don't always have time to find the spark, to tend to the flames, to keep that motivation going.
Let's talk a little bit more about what gets in the way of motivation today, because, as the title of your previous book, there are kids that just don't care, or they're not engaged. They just don't seem to be interested in anything. Why do you think that is?
So I think there are a few reasons. The number one reason is lack of sleep. So if I had one thing that we could change in our world right now for adults and children that could decrease rates of anxiety and depression, which are through the roof, it would be to get more sleep. Sleep is so closely related to mood and depression and anxiety. So that's one thing. Kids are not getting enough sleep. The other thing is they're overscheduled. And, you kind of think like, oh, you're not motivated. Let's have you do more. That actually gets in the way of our motivation. Think about as an adult, when you've got too much on your plate, that's the last time, the last uh, time that you're really motivated to do anything, because you're too busy doing the things you've got to do. It's hard to find your passion. And it's not like we've got to be motivated to do everything in life, but we've got to have a little bit of those things in our lives that we're passionate about to help us stay motivated in the things we're not so passionate about. So overscheduling is another one. And then, of course, screens. So we are addicted to our phones. We're addicted to screens. That there's little that we can find on our phones or on our computers that is going to really make us be super motivated. In fact, I think it's a vicious circle, because we get on our screens when we're sort of unmotivated, which causes us to be more unmotivated.
And we're in this world of distraction. Screen's a big part of it, but there's so much demanding our attention, it's hard to focus.
It's really true. And when you think about when we were growing up, you kind of had a lot of free time. You had a lot of time to just where you had to kind of figure things out. Like, my mother would say, if you're bored, like, I'll find something for you to do. So you found something to do. And that's actually where motivation starts. It's like, I have this time. If I don't fill it myself with things I love to do, somebody's going to fill it for me. And kids don't have that opportunity anymore to just sort of muddle around and spin their wheels a little bit and find what makes them tick. So that's a big issue, is that we have a lot of distractions and not enough time to just sort of percolate.
I'm wondering about the role of parents, because you talked about this workbook could be something that they work on together, they work on separately. And as a child is trying to figure out what they're really interested in, what they're passionate about, I think that parents sometimes have a tendency to try to impose those things on the kid. This is what you should care about. This is what you should be passionate about. But that's not really them. And so they're not going to feel it.
Absolutely true. That's a big motivation killer, is when parents want them to do something that they want to do. So the parent who was the hockey player wants to be the hockey coach. The child doesn't really like hockey. They want to be in the school band. And that's just not what the dream that parent had for their child. So then the child doesn't do hockey or band. Then what you have is a child who really is unmotivated in lots of areas, because they haven't had the time to do the things they love, and they don't want to do the things that their parents want them to do. So it really is about kind of letting your child find their way, which can be a little scary. And so especially if you've got a middle school student or a high school student who seems really unmotivated, it's got to start about talking about them and saying what you're seeing. So being able to say to your child, you seem really, really unmotivated these days. It doesn't seem like there's a lot that's going on that's really making you happy. What is that about? Can you tell me? And sometimes kids will say, well, there are lots of things that make me happy. You just don't give me any time to do that. Or you and dad want me to do such and such. So opening up that discussion is important. And then at other times, it's a child who doesn't really know himself. The parents don't really know the child. Nobody really knows what the child is good at or really naturally motivated to do.
Well, that's part of what I see this workbook is designed to do, is to help the child figure out what really does spark their interest. And one of the paradoxes here, I guess, is if you're unmotivated, what's going to get them to want to engage with this workbook?
Oh, that's the perfect question, because that was really, as we were writing this book, it was one of our biggest questions is you can't just write a book and give it to a motivated child who's going to do it. So that's why we really tried to design things that are really opportunities to discuss things, and also things that teachers can use in classrooms, or people can do it in group settings too. But, for example, there might be an activity, or there is an activity in there that's about how to spend more time in your aptitude zone. So we talk in the book about how we're motivated to do things that we can do, that we have the aptitude to do. And so thinking about our aptitudes along with someone else, along with a parent who's also thinking about maybe their own aptitudes and how much time they're spending, what kind of an example they're giving to their child, that can be a really good way to let your child know that you're engaged in this learning process as well. So doing it with your child. Now, it's kind of funny, though, because the book's been out for a couple of months now, and I have heard parents say, I did give him the book, and he did some of these on his own, and then, sort of put it aside for a while. So it's funny because the book, it's hard to engage an unmotivated child to do something, but the book is so much about them. And even unmotivated people like to talk about themselves and like to gain insight on themselves. And it's not the kind of book where you've got to do something like now you've got to make these goals that are going to be set in stone. But it's really about, what do you think? What makes you happy? Who are the people in your life you admire, as ways of kind of figuring out what the sorts of things you want to do. So even things like keeping a happiness calendar and those sorts of things to help us get in our minds things that make us happy often are things that motivate us. So it's built so that kids can use it even though they're pretty unmotivated.
Well, the thing I think about this is, and this impacts adults as well, you just don't know. And sometimes you have to experiment. So, well, I'll try this, I'll try that, and see what lights me up.
Yeah, and you can't cram too much into the time that you have either. You've got to let that happen. So again, sort of thinking about motivation as a fire that needs a spark, it needs air, it needs fuel. And you might find that you don't have enough air, enough time to do a certain thing that you've always been interested in doing. Or you might find that you don't really have the drive, kind of like the fuel to keep going in it. That's okay. And that's okay when you've got a child who tries something and doesn't love it. You've got to try it for long enough so that you know you don't love it. And that's the key. And but you're right. It's really a lifelong process of trying new things and getting remotivated and re-engaged with things you love to do.
Another thing that occurred to me is that a parent might work with a child and the child gets really excited about a thing. They're really into it. And then later they lose interest in it. And the parent might think, well, I did something wrong. I didn't find what they really wanted. But it seems like that's natural. And whatever you learn when you're engaged in that, you can apply later, even though you may not still be doing it like you used to before.
Absolutely. I mean, think about all the kids who are in band in 8th grade. Few of them are still playing that instrument when they're 35. However, they're learning a lot about being part of a community, making music, learning about art, learning about how things are composed, tons of things. So we do tend to, in our society, be like, they picked up the clarinet, they are going to play for the Philadelphia Orchestra. That's not really how life is constructed. And so the important thing is when your child decides they don't want to do something is to really engage. Why not? What was it that led you to do this, to end this? What can we plug in that will take the place of that? And it's okay to say, you used to love playing the violin. Now you don't. That's okay. But let's find something else that you love to do.
Can you give us a couple more examples of the kind of exercises and tools that you provide in the book that will help kids figure out what their passion is so that they will become motivated to get engaged with it?
Yeah, so the book is divided into different sections that kind of map onto different areas of motivation. So, who am I? That aptitude. What do I like to spend time doing, which we call practice, and what gives me pleasure? So, for example, one whole section of the book is on what makes me happy. So to kind of think about what gives me pleasure. And so there are things like, what's the best day ever? What would be my best day ever? What would that look like? What would it look like today? What would it look like when I'm 25 years old? Can you imagine that? What would it look like when I'm the age of my grandmother? What is the best day ever if you had, if you weren't able to use screens, for example? We've got another, what would a best day look like if you could only spend $10, for example? Other things in that section of the book are things like keeping a happiness calendar, or what sorts of things that, like thinking about helping others and having gratitude for others in your life. What does that look like? Like, so for example, what does it look like to help others and to be kind to other people? What are the sorts of things that you like doing in that realm? And then also sort of like practicing gratitude. Where's your pleasure right now? And so then there's another section of the book that it really talks about, who am I? So, how would I describe myself emotionally? What are my strengths? What are my strengths that are similar to other people in the family? What are the strengths that are different from other people in the family? How do other people in the family see me? So one activity is called, How Do You See Me? And the child interviews other people, parents, grandparents, teachers. What do you see as my strengths? What do you see as my weaknesses? And so you're getting information, not just kind of looking inward, because that can be kind of hard, but also looking outward from other people.
Now, we've touched on a number of these points already in this interview, but what would you say are some of the key insights that you hope parents will take from this book that they can use to help their kids get motivated?
So I think in talking about that aptitude, practice, and pleasure, we sort of see this as a Venn diagram. So you've got to know who you are, you've got to know where you'd like to spend your time, and you've got to know what gives you pleasure. And you'd think that all those things are together, but they're not, because we've got, as we talked about, distractions. We've got parents who see us one way, we see ourselves another. So where we want to be is in that center of that Venn diagram, doing things that we're competent at, that we like doing, and that give us joy. And so helping parents see the child for who they are and being able to realistically say, my child does not have the talent for hockey, for example, but they do have the talent for this. How do I get more time in their schedule so they can do more of that? Or perhaps it's a child who loves something and doesn't have the skill set for it. So they perhaps, let's use hockey again. They love playing hockey. That gives them pleasure, but they don't really have a great skill set. Well, then what you have to do as a parent is help them find the right kind of coaching, the right kind of support that helps them do what they love to do. So it's not easy. Sometimes the things we want to do and we're motivated to do are not the things that come easily to us. And some of the things that we see as parents are easy for our kids. That's what we want them to do. It's not what they want them to do. That's not what they want to do. So we've got to kind of love the child we have, not the one we thought we'd have or we wish we had. So that's what I really would love for them to take away from the book.
To learn more, the book is the Motivation Mindset Workbook by Ellen Braaten, Ph.D., and Hilary Bush, Ph.D. Dr. Braaten, thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you'd like to purchase the Motivation Mindset Workbook, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you appreciate this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. Well, thank you for watching this edition of the Kids Bookshelf. I'm Dan Scunner. Until next time, keep sharing the gift of reading.